Greetings from Bell'Italia 88 and welcome back. I'm Caterina Brazzi-Castracane, I am an historian and I am here in collaboration with the Italian Cultural Center in New Delhi to share with you another appointment dedicated to the rediscovery of some wonderful cities in Italy. For the same reason, today we are going to talk about Vicenza, a small but important town in the north part of the Italian peninsula, in that region called Veneto, region that actually we had already discovered together, talking about other important and amazing examples of cultural cities, including Venice and Verona. And today we are going to talk about Vicenza in particular because this is a city with a specific link with one of the genius of the Renaissance time, the master Andrea Palladio, designated to be considered as the father of the modern idea of architecture. Actually, for us, it's important to start remembering that the reason why Vicenza is listed by UNESCO as a cultural town is basically related with the huge presence of important buildings designed and partially realized by Palladio during the 16th century. This master was, in fact, actually able to transform the shape of this medieval town, creating important buildings designated later to be remembered as some icons of the Renaissance time. And he was so famous and popular during his life that after him his specific style was chosen to transform not only other important Italian cities, but in general other important international cities all around the world, including in the United States, that still today consider the Palladio as the father of the real American architecture. We will try to understand together how it was possible and how it happened during the history. But first of all, who really was this master? Andrea di Pietro della Gondola, a man who actually was born in Padua, not in Vicenza. Padua, that is still today an important and cultural city, remarked by the important presence of the Cappella degli Scrovegni, this amazing place completely decorated by Giotto at the starting point of the 14th century. And Padua, that in particular, together with Vicenza, during the 16th century was related with the important Republic of Venice. This is one of the reasons why Palladio was able, at the age of 16, to be enrolled in Vicenza in the guild of the bricklayers and stonemasons. And while he was working according to this rule, he was noticed by an important aristocratic man, Gian Giorgio Trissino, designated later to be remembered first of all as an important author of the Renaissance literature, but also as the first patron of Palladio. And actually Trissino was the man who gave to this young talent the nickname Palladio to emphasize the wisdom and the genius linked with the ancient Greek goddess Pallas Athene. These two men were able during that century to travel around Europe, and in particular they were able to discover for 4 times after the year 1541 the ancient city of Rome. And you have to imagine that Rome at that time was not only the huge capital linked with the important past of the Roman Empire, but it was also the city of papacy. And actually the city had already undergone important transformations realized by important artists of that time, including Bramante, Michelangelo and Raffaello. This in particular means that Palladio had the opportunity in Rome to realize the two different things. First of all, he was able to observe the important monuments linked with the past and with the present of that century. But also doing these things, he was also able to rethink himself as a member of this important generation of artists destined really to transform the history of the world and in general the history of art. So he first of all started studying, and he studied a lot of different and important architectural treatises. First of all, the masterpiece by Vitruvio, the Bible of the Latin vision about architecture. But he also studied these important books published by important modern architects, including Alberti and Serlio. Doing it, he was also able to write his first masterpiece, a pocket guide of Rome, that you can consider the first pocket guide of the history, dedicated to the most remarkable monuments that he had seen in Rome, and destined to be the perfect basis to reinterpret the concept of classicism. After this experience, Palladio came back to Vicenza, and there and in general in the Veneto region, he was able to realize the important different example of buildings. First of all, private palaces inside the historic center of Vicenza, but also in other part of that region, destined to private owner who wanted to celebrate their power. But also he realized important public works in the city of Vicenza, but also in the city of Venice. And eventually he was also able to rethink about the traditional Villa Veneta, creating a new model of this countryside villa named after him, Palladian Villa, and designated actually to be the most important model of this architecture exported in other parts of the world. At the end of his career in 1570 in Venice, he published the 4 books about architecture, considered since that moment the Bible of the new interpretation of this art. Actually, the UNESCO listed something about 50 monuments designed by Palladio as cultural heritage only in the region of Veneto. And we can divide these important examples in 2 different categories. First of all, about 23 important palaces realized by Palladio during his life in the historic center of Vicenza, and basically around this main public square called Piazza dei Signori, that still today is the center of this city. The second category of monuments designed by Palladio is a list of 24 examples of Palladian Villa. And in particular, he realized an important example in the area around Vicenza and other cities of this region, but actually also a lot of villas on the area of the Brenta River, designated since that moment to be the perfect stage for this new kind of residence. Among all these examples, we will talk about the archetypical villa, considered the first interpretation of this new model of building, later exported in other parts of the world. But first of all, we have to talk about the historic center of this city that is still today, as you can notice using this slide, by 23 monuments linked in different ways to the figures of Palladio. And among them, I choose for you a short itinerary to discover the central part of this town and 5 examples of architectures linked with this genius and also with the history of this city, starting from the Palladian Museum, the best place where you can enjoy and discover all the drawings and the designs realized by him during his life. This museum is linked with an important and international center of research, and I choose it to start our itinerary for two different reasons. First of all, because on the website of this museum you can find a lot of different information about this genius of architecture, and this museum is a sort of a semi-virtual museum. So on the website you can find different experience to discover architecture from the interior, not from the outside. But actually, I choose this place also for another reason, because the museum is still today housed inside an important aristocratical palace of Vicenza, Palazzo Barbarano, actually the only large palace entirely built by the hand of Palladio during his life. As you can see, using this model, the palace was realized in a U shape with a private courtyard inside, designated to house the private part of this residence. And still today, the most remarkable part of this building is the facade. First of all, because this could be considered the perfect example of all that elements that are so characteristic of the new style called Palladiano. First of all, as you can see in this occasion, the composition of the facade characterized basically by the non-axial position of the entrance portal. And in this case, you can notice that these harmonic elements is completely transformed in something new looking to this facade. And Palladio was also able to re-elaborate different artistical elements from the past, including different kind of columns or different kind of capitals, because as you can see using this photograph, he used unique capitals for the columns on the ground floor. This is a unique capital, but he actually used Corinthian capitals to decorate the noble floor, the most important floor of the palace. This kind of composition, full of important elements linked with the past and in particular with different artistical phases of the past, is the perfect work realized by Palladio to emphasize the power of classicism, but also to create something modern, something that is powerful and that was destined in this direction to house not only important aristocratic families, but also important institutions that should be housed inside palaces like these. The museum is only 5 minutes walking far from the center of Vicenza, Piazza dei Signori, actually a complex of 3 main squares. In the center, Piazza dei Signori, dominated by the presence of the Basilica Palladiana and of the tower and of the Loggia del Capitanio, and this palace that was destined to house the Monte di Pietà. But actually, At the end of this important public space, we can find the Piazza delle Erbe that you can consider as the open-air living room of Vicenza, while on the opposite side we can find the small square named after the statue dedicated to Andrea Palladio that was situated in the center of it. All this space is considered still today the center of the city, even because it was originally the Roman forum of the Vicenza, the town founded by Romans, but also because during the Middle Age on this square were realized two important buildings, the Palatium Vetus and the Palatium Communis, on the area of this public place destined to be the center also of the political life of Vicenza. Later, in particular during the 15th century, probably the master Domenico da Venezia built on the original ancient palaces a new Gothic building destined to be called the Palazzo della Ragione. About 1546, Andrea Palladio was entrusted to redesign this Gothic building, and actually he realized two more loggias to add to the original building, creating a sort of a new effect of an ancient building with outside a modern one. He was inspired to do this by two important examples of palaces that were already built in other parts of the Italian peninsula. First of all, he was inspired by the important Marciana library, this amazing palace realized by Sansovino in Venice in front of the huge Basilica di San Marco, and destined to be one of the first icon of the Renaissance. But actually Palladio looked also to another important example, another Palazzo della Ragione, already realized in his hometown Padua. In this case, he realized this ambitious overturned sheep hull roof, completely inspired by the same palace in Padua and destined to be the icon of a new kind of modernity without borders. Later, at the end of the 16th century and at the starting point of the 17th, the palace was ended with the balcony and with the figures of 23 different marble statues realized by different sculptors for this building. Still today, the loggias are the most remarkable monument of this city, and still today under them we can find a lot of jewelries destined to remember us that for a long time Vicenza was considered the queen of the gold. And this also means that there we can find one of the most important international museums completely devoted to celebrate jewelry, and also a lot of boutique where it is still possible to buy important example of golden jewelry still product inside this city. The rest of Piazza dei Signori is a sort of open-air museum, and we have to remember, among all the different monuments that were realized during the centuries in this space. First of all, the Torre di Piazza, that is a wonderful example of a tower originally built in the 12th century, and in particular with a clock that was originally posed there in 1344. Now the clock is a reinterpretation of the ancient one, but this is still today a sign of the power of this city. On the opposite wall of this tower, we can find also a niche with important marble statues with the Holy Virgin Mary, with the Child and two saints, realized probably during the 16th century by another artist, Albanese, and destined to celebrate also the power of the faith linked with this important city. On the opposite side of this square, and here you can recognize the Basilica Palladiana, the tower, and here two more important buildings. You can find first of all the Loggia del Capitanio, one of the amazing monuments realized in Vicenza to celebrate the artistical vision of the Renaissance time, and in particular an example of a not finished palace, because originally it was designed to occupy an entire district. But you can also find this important and strange building realized around that church to house the Monte di Pietà. The Loggia del Capitanio is another important work realized by Palladio actually 20 years later the Basilica, and destined to be the perfect icon of two different elements. First of all, it was realized to be the house of the Capitanio, that was the Venetian deputy in Vicenza. But it was the palace in particular decorated with important statues, probably realized by important masters, including Robini, with a specific iconographical theme, the Battle of Lepanto, the naval battle of the year 1571, destined to transform the future of the Holy Christian Europe against the Ottoman Turks. And you can recognize important elements also in this case linked with the past: columns, Corinthian capitals, statues, and different kind of stuccos and marble around the arch, the niche, and the window. Actually, really, as I was saying, linked with the past, but destined to celebrate the new power of this city. Also, the important building of the Monte di Pietà was reorganized during the 16th and the 17th century around this church, the ancient church of St. Vincent, that actually was realized before the rest of the palace, as you can see, using this original medieval map. Between the 1614 and 1617, the facade was completely reorganized to be, in this case, the icon of another taste, the Baroque one. Also presence in other part of the city of Vicenza, so the demonstration that the power of this city really continued during the centuries of the modern age. The end of Piazza dei Signori is remarked by the presence of these two important columns with at the top two different statues. First of all, the first column realized in 1464 with on the top the Lion of St. Mark, the symbol of Venice and its republic, while the second one, realized later, about 1640, was topped with the figures of Christ as the Redeemer. These columns are still today the limit between Piazza dei Signori and Piazza delle Erbe, that you can consider as the perfect stage for the aperitif and the good dishes still served in this city. Even because you have to remember that the gastronomical tradition is important in this city. In particular, it is linked with one special dish, the important codfish at Vicenza style. An amazing reinterpretation of a recipe from the tradition linked with the poor codfish and destined also to be protected by a specific confraternita that was born about 30 years ago to protect the original recipes and also to control the high qualities of the restaurants where this dish is still today served. If you want to try, this is the original recipe of this dish that is considered part of the cultural heritage of Vicenza has the other important monuments, also because this is a recipe of about 400 years. But actually, walking on the main street of Vicenza that is called Corso Palladio, we find the Church of the Holy Crown that I want to share with you for different reasons. First of all, because this is a church with a specific link with one of the thorn of the Jesus crown that was, according to legend, given to this city from the Saint King of France, Louis IX. And also because this is an important and amazing Gothic building that was built during the 13th century. Still today it housed inside important example of paintings realized during the modern age, together with important private chapel, and among them the Valmarana one was completely redesigned by the genius of Palladio. But also inside there is an amazing painting by Giovanni Bellini. I am talking about the altarpiece dedicated to the baptism of Christ. It was realized by Bellini during the first part of the 16th century for the Garzadori altar inside his church, and this painting is destined to be remembered as one of the most important pictorial masterpiece of the history. In particular, Bellini was able to celebrate the moment of the baptism of Christ, the figures of Christ, perfectly in line with the sacrament and with the peaceful kingdom of God, the figures of Saint John the Baptist on his left side, but also the presence of three female figures that are here to celebrate the three theological virtues, respectively the faith, the hope, and the charity. Bellini, who was also able to sign this masterpiece in this part of the painting, that is also remarkable for the celebration of all the natural elements linked with the power of God, while the figures of Godfather at the top of this painting was realized later, probably during the 19th century, with around them angels and the symbols of the four evangelists. But this important painting really help us to understand which was exactly the revolution that took place during that century in general in Italy, but in particular also in Vicenza, where some years later was also opened the amazing Teatro Olimpico, that you can consider as the first indoor theater in masonry never built in the world, with interiors made in wood, stucco, and plaster, and it was originally designed by Palladio during the last part of his life and later inaugurated after his death. The original design by Palladio was a perfect reinterpretation of the perfect Roman theater as described by Vitruvio. You can find still today inside an important stage with an elliptical terrace auditorium with columns, niche, and statues to celebrate the arts. All these elements were thought to emphasize the power of this art inside a sort of temple of culture. Later, for the opening of this theater, one of the pupils of Palladio, Vincenzo Scamozzi, was able to realize also the stage, and he realized a perfect representation of the 7 rows of Thebes destined to house the first representation of the Oedipus, the king, by Sophocles. And Scamozzi was able to create something that was originally realized to be the temporary stage of this theater, but that was considered in that time so amazing that it was transformed into the perpetual part of this theater. Scamozzi also realized 2 more spaces inside the theater, the ODEO and the ANTIODEO. 2 rooms, the first one, the ODEO, destined to house the meetings of the Accademia. The Accademia that was originally linked also with Palladio because he was a member of it. But also he realized the ANTIODEO, another space that was decorated later by Francesco Maffei with important monochrome destined also to tell the history of Vicenza during the centuries, including the visit of these Japoneses legatis of a region of Japan ambassadors that arrived in Vicenza during the modern age. Palladio was at the same time, as I said before, the real new interpreter of a new kind of Villa Veneta that you have to imagine as a myth of that part of Italy. You have to think that during 3 centuries in that part of Italy were realized something about 3,500 different examples of villas, and a lot of them were realized in the period before the life of Palladio, as the example that you are seeing with this photograph that represents Villa Contarini sul Brenta. Palladio actually was inspired by that traditional villa, but he decided to realize another interpretation of this private residence, destined to celebrate the power of the owner, but also to be a real example of a productive residence. So he was able to create actually an example of a multifunctional villa, destined to be the place of three important functions. First of all, the active life of the villa, including carrying out of the agricultural works and storage, the wheat and the wine. Then the second function of this kind of villa was, as I said, the celebration of the owner's power. And Palladio realized it starting with the perfect shape of this place, but also realizing important decoration inside the same building. And the third one was linked with the idea of a specific place destined only to the culture, to the pension, to the books, and to the relaxed life in the countryside. These three functions were linked with three important elements destined to be the symbols of this new architecture: elegance, balance, and symmetry, chosen by this architect as the most representative characteristics of that period, and actually transformed into the most remarkable pilasters of this new building. Among all the important villas realized by Palladio, we can name the Villa Almerico CAPRA-VALMARANA, or La Rotonda, because this is the name that really characterized it all around the world. A villa that was realized not so far from the city of Vicenza during the 16th century, and destined to house the family of this important canonist Paolo Almerico. Actually, this villa was built upon a small hill called Monticello, and later this name will come back in the history of other important palaces in other parts of the world. The project of this villa was designed by Palladio with a central pan, a cubic volume that spins around a circular room with a dome, and four different parts realized on the four different walls of this central part of the building. The dome, in this case, was realized by Vincenzo Scamozzi, the same master who finished the Teatro Olimpico and considered as the most important pupil among the other of Palladio. The idea of Palladio was used the perfect shapes of geometry, in particular circles and squares. He was able to create this kind of composition that was basically linked with the philosophical aim of the Renaissance to have the possibility to inscribe a perfect circle inside a perfect square. This mathematical theorem is impossible to demonstrate, but he tried to do it according to the geometry, realizing an important central circle inscribed to an important rectangular. So these archetypical shapes were chosen to celebrate not only the power of mathematics and geometry, but also the power of this new building, considered in that time the new temple of this new aristocratic society. Also, the interior was originally thought by Palladio to be the perfect place to house an important decoration. And this decoration, in this case, was realized later by other important artists, including Dorigny, with the aim to celebrate the past, in particular with the creation of this amazing temple ale with false columns, arches, and different kind of stuccos, and also with the figures of these giants destined to celebrate the power of the iconographical themes linked with the palace and the past. In this case, the villa was also called the Rotonda, as the perfect example of geometry already built in Rome during the Roman times. I am talking about the Pantheon, that is still well known as the Rotonda, and that is considered the starting point of this form of classicism. And during the next centuries, all these monuments were rediscovered by important artists, including Inigo Jones, an important architect who arrived in Italy from England and who really fell in love with the Palladian architectures to be able to export this model of building in England, and from there, from all the different parts of the world linked with this important empire. From England, this interpretation of building really transformed the vision of architecture in general, to arrive to transform also the shape of the United States, in this case for a specific reason. In particular, because during the centuries, during the 17th century in particular, a lot of different examples of Palladian villas were realized all around the world, and they were observed by important and powerful figures, including, for the United States, the third president of their history, Thomas Jefferson, who is still today remembered as the man of the Independence Declaration of this state. But actually, first of all, Thomas Jefferson was an architect who spent some times of his life in Italy and in Europe in general. So he had the opportunity to admire this kind of buildings. And after he had seen them, he was also able to read the masterpiece by Palladio, the 4 books of architecture. And so he decided to transform this style into the perfect one to create the new United States. Some years ago, Inside the Palladium Museum in Vicenza was organized an important exhibition destined to celebrate both the figures of Jefferson and Palladio as the real interpreters of a new world. And from this exhibition, we had learned that Jefferson was also able to build his own and private house. And he decided to call this house that you are seeing here with this photograph Monticello in honor of the Palladian Villa that we had already discovered together. And that this villa was used as the iconographical theme for the important United States money product during the 20th century, including this coin with also the name Monticello over the representation of this important building. But actually Jefferson was also the man who designed one of the first projects for the new capital of the United States, the Washington D.C. And he in particular thought to realize an important house destined to the president. Later this house was really realized with the help of other important designers and architects of that time, and we know it as the White House. That is maybe the most remarkable example of a Palladian villa in the world. And actually, this is the tangible proof that the power of Palladio was so strong, and that his art was so revolutionary, that his designs and his drawings were really able to influence all the different parts of the world, including this important international stage. At this point, I stop sharing with you my screen, only to say thank you very much for your attention, and we will see again to talk about other important and amazing Italian cities, and also you can see all the other lectures that we had already shared together on the YouTube channel linked with the Italian Culture Institute in New Delhi. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you the next time to talk about other important and amazing places. Bye bye.